Frozen salvation. The cold was killing her. Aldra could feel her lungs crystallizing with each labored breath, the brittle air turning her respiratory system into fragile ice formations. The escape pod's temperature controls had failed 15 minutes after impact, and that had been, she checked her frost-crusted wrist unit, 8 hours ago. Her exosuit, designed for brief exposure to vacuum rather than sustained planetary cold, beeped another warning. Core temperature approaching critical. The pod's emergency beacon continued its doleful ping, a rhythmic reminder that help was theoretically possible but statistically improbable. Just keep breathing, she whispered to herself, the words forming white puffs that dissipated in the dimly lit interior. The sound of her own voice was an anchor, something to hold on to as consciousness threatened to slip away. Another alert chimed. Oxygen recycler efficiency down to 38%. But she barely registered it. The cold had become a presence, a predator circling ever closer. Aldra's numb fingers fumbled for the emergency stimpack on her belt. One left. She'd been rationing them, using them only when she felt herself drifting too far toward the siren call of hypothermic sleep. With clumsy movements, she pressed it against her neck, wincing as the needle pierced skin and the chemical cocktail burned into her bloodstream. Warmth spread outward from the injection site, artificial and temporary, but warmth nonetheless. As the stimulant took effect, Aldra's mind cleared enough to replay the sequence of events that had led to her current predicament. The diplomatic mission to Helios 7 had gone smoothly enough. Negotiations with the Council of 13 about the new trade routes, polite conversation at the reception afterward. Captain Nerissa Blackwood in her immaculate officer's uniform, making thinly veiled threats disguised as pleasantries. Standard procedure. Their ship, the GSV Improbable Circumference, had been halfway back to the core systems when the proximity alert screamed to life. The memory came in vivid sensory flashes, the ship bucking beneath her feet as the first projectile hit, the acrid smell of electrical fires, the taste of blood where she'd bitten her tongue during impact. Commander Ollivant's voice over the comms, unnaturally calm as he ordered all non-essential personnel to the escape pods. Second Engineer Toombs gripping her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep as he pulled her toward the evacuation corridor. Go, Lieutenant. Go. The hiss of the pod door sealing behind her. The violent shudder as it ejected into space. The sickening spin before stabilizers engaged. Then the long fall toward the ice moon below, collision alarms blaring as the pod's guidance system struggled to find a landing zone that wasn't glacial crevasse or knife-like ice formations. A flash of warmth against her cheek startled Aldra from her recollections. For one delirious moment, she thought it might be rescue, a search team with thermal blankets and hot beverages. But it was just the pod's environmental system making one last heroic attempt to function, pushing a feeble breath of heated air through a vent before sputtering into silence. The brief respite made the returning cold feel even more vicious, like jumping into a frozen lake after sitting in a sauna. Just as Aldra was calculating how long she had left before the cold claimed her, 20 minutes, 30, a sound outside the pod caught her attention. Not the howling of the ice moon's notorious methane winds, which had been her constant companion since landing. Something else. Something rhythmic, deliberate. Thump. Scrape. Thump. Scrape. Moving with painful slowness, Aldra dragged herself to the pod's single porthole. The exterior floodlight still worked, illuminating a small patch of the blizzard-swept terrain. At first, she saw nothing but swirling ice crystals dancing in the wind. Then a shape moved at the edge of the light. Tall, bipedal, wrapped in what appeared to be layers of thick fabric. A local? Aldra's heart lurched with hope. The intel on this moon had mentioned no intelligent native species, but Galactic Survey was notoriously outdated. The figure moved closer, and Aldra could see it was humanoid but heavily bundled against the cold in what looked like hand-sewn furs and woven textiles. Its face was obscured by a hood and some kind of breathing apparatus. The figure approached the pod and raised a gloved hand, pointing to the emergency release for the hatch. Aldra hesitated. Opening the pod would let in the killing cold. But staying inside was a death sentence anyway. With a silent prayer to whatever cosmic entities might be listening, she hit the release. The frozen refuge. The hatch slid open with a hydraulic hiss, and knife-edged cold slashed into the pod. The figure ducked inside quickly and pulled the hatch closed behind it. As it straightened to its full height, a good 20 centimeters taller than Aldra, it pushed back its hood. The face revealed was human, or human-adjacent. Weathered male features framed by a salt and pepper beard crusted with ice. Deep lines etched the corners of pale blue eyes that regarded her with cautious assessment. Not a native, then. Another off-worlder. The man unwound a scarf from his lower face and spoke, his voice a gravelly rumble. "You look half dead, Lieutenant." He nodded at the insignia on her exosuit. "Let's get you somewhere warm before the rest of you catches up." Before Aldra could respond, he was pulling supplies from the many pockets of his heavy outer coat. A thermal blanket that he wrapped around her shoulders. A flask of something that steamed when he unscrewed the cap. A pair of insulated boots that looked comically large but promised blessed warmth. "Drink," he ordered, pressing the flask into her hands. "It's not pleasant, but it'll warm you from the inside out." Aldra took a sip and nearly gagged. The liquid burned like reactor fuel and tasted vaguely of fermented fruit and medicinal herbs. But true to his word, warmth bloomed in her stomach and spread outward. She took another swallow, bigger this time. "Boots on," the man said, already helping her remove her standard-issue footwear. "Then we move. Storm's picking up, and we've got 4 kilometers to my outpost. Name's Voss, by the way. Friedrich Voss. Aldra Metonin, Galactic Diplomatic Corps," she replied, her voice stronger now that warmth was returning to her body. "Thank you for the rescue." Voss grunted. "Save your thanks until we're actually safe, Lieutenant Metonin. This moon doesn't forgive mistakes." 10 minutes later, they were trudging through the blizzard, linked by a tether. Voss led the way, massive and sure-footed in the treacherous terrain. The thermal blanket, now converted into an additional layer beneath the emergency climate shell Voss had given her, kept Aldra from freezing solid, but the cold still bit at any exposed skin with vicious teeth. The wind howled around them, picking up ice crystals and hurling them like miniature daggers. Through the swirling white, Aldra could barely make out Voss's broad back ahead of her, his heavy coat dusted with accumulating snow and ice. The journey seemed endless, each step requiring monumental effort as they fought through snowdrifts and navigated around ice formations that loomed like abstract sculptures in the gloom. Aldra's thoughts began to drift, the cold seeping past her physical defenses and into her mind. She thought of her small apartment on New Lisbon, with its south-facing windows that caught the afternoon sun. She thought of her sister Ellie's cooking, spicy Martian fusion cuisine that made your eyes water and your sinuses clear. She thought of warmth in all its forms, emotional, physical, spiritual. Just as her legs were about to give out, Voss stopped. They stood before what appeared to be a solid wall of ice, unremarkable except for its vertical smoothness in a landscape of chaotic formations. Voss placed his gloved hand against a specific spot, and a section of the ice wall slid aside, revealing a metal door behind it. Radiant heat poured out of the opening like a physical entity, embracing Aldra and drawing a gasp of relief from her frost-burned lungs. Voss ushered her inside, and the ice wall camouflage slid back into place behind them. They stood in a small decontamination chamber where automated systems blasted them with warm air to remove ice and snow from their outer layers. A second door opened, and Aldra found herself in what could only be described as a cozy den carved from the ice moon's frozen heart. The space was perhaps 30 meters square, with walls of polished ice reinforced with metal struts. Heating elements glowed orange-red at strategic points, maintaining a temperature that felt tropical after the exterior cold. Mismatched furniture, some clearly salvaged from spacecraft, some handcrafted from local materials, was arranged around a central fire pit where actual flames danced merrily, seeming to defy the nature of their frozen surroundings. The walls were lined with shelves containing books, equipment, preserved foodstuffs, and curious artifacts Aldra couldn't immediately identify. "Welcome to the frozen refuge," Voss said, helping her remove the outer layers of protective gear. He wore a simple thermal suit beneath his massive coat, faded black with patches at the elbows and knees. Despite its worn appearance, Aldra noted the suit was a military model, at least 20 years old but built to last. "It's not much, but it's warm and safe." "It's wonderful," Aldra breathed, moving closer to the fire pit and extending her hands toward the flames. "How is their fire?" "The atmosphere. Imported oxygen, carefully regulated," Voss explained, hanging their outer garments on hooks near the entrance. "The fire's mostly psychological comfort. The real heating comes from geothermal taps I've sunk 200 meters down. There's a surprising amount of volcanic activity under all this ice." As warmth returned to Aldra's extremities, it brought with it the pins and needles agony of circulation being restored. She winced but welcomed the pain as proof she would keep her fingers and toes. Voss noticed her discomfort and gestured toward a padded bench near the fire. "Sit. I'll make tea, real tea, not that survival swill I gave you earlier. And you can tell me how a diplomatic corps officer ended up freezing to death in an escape pod on one of the most inhospitable moons in the sector." "Ice dragons." While Voss busied himself at a small cooking station, Aldra took the opportunity to study her savior more closely. He moved with the efficient precision of someone long accustomed to conserving energy, a trait common to those who lived in harsh environments. His beard and hair, now thawed, were more gray than black, and she estimated his age at around 60 standard Earth years, though it was hard to tell with the life-extending treatments available to military personnel. And he had been military. Of that she was certain. It showed in his posture, his situational awareness, the way his eyes continuously scanned their surroundings despite the apparent safety. "You're staring, Lieutenant," Voss remarked without turning around. "I know I'm not much to look at these days, but it's impolite all the same." Aldra felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Sorry. Professional habit. Diplomatic corps trains us to read people." "And what do you read?" He turned, carrying 2 steaming mugs, and handed one to her before settling in a chair opposite. The tea was dark and fragrant, with hints of something like cinnamon but earthier. Aldra took a careful sip before answering. "Former military. High rank. Special operations, not regular forces. Self-imposed exile rather than retirement. Been here at least 5 years, possibly longer." Voss's eyebrows rose slightly. "Not bad. Some corrections, though. 15 years on this moon, and the exile wasn't entirely self-imposed." He took a long drink of his tea, then set the mug aside. "Now your turn. What happened to your ship?" Aldra described the attack, the suddenness of it, the apparent targeting of the engines and communication array, suggesting the attackers wanted to disable rather than destroy. It felt coordinated. Professional. Not pirates, they would have gone for the cargo holds first. This was something else. Something personal, Voss suggested. Or political, given your line of work. I'd guess the latter. Before Aldra could respond, a chime sounded from a console built into the wall. Voss rose and checked a display screen, his expression darkening. "We have visitors. Uninvited ones." "The attackers?" Aldra asked, setting aside her tea and standing, her body tensing for new danger. "No. These are local, and much more immediately problematic." Voss moved to a storage locker and retrieved what appeared to be a modified pulse rifle. He tossed Aldra a smaller sidearm. "You any good with that?" She checked the weapon, standard galactic issue, though with some aftermarket modifications. "I qualified expert 3 years running." "Good. You might need it." Voss turned to another screen and pulled up exterior camera feeds. The blizzard had intensified, but the cameras cut through the whiteout with thermal imaging, revealing several large shapes moving toward the hidden entrance. "Ice dragons," Voss said grimly. "Not actual dragons, of course. Some xenozoologist with a poetic streak named them. Think reptilian wolves with adaptive body chemistry. They usually hunt in the lowlands, but the storm must have driven them up here. Aldra studied the thermal images with growing concern. The creatures moved with predatory grace despite the harsh conditions, their body temperatures fluctuating in patterns that suggested sophisticated thermal regulation. Are they sentient? She asked. Debatable. Highly intelligent, certainly. Problem solvers. And they've figured out that where there's a hidden door, there might be warmth and food behind it. Voss adjusted something on his rifle. They've tried to breach the outpost twice before. Third time isn't going to be the charm. A loud scraping sound came from the entrance, claws on ice. Voss motioned for Aldra to take position behind an overturned table he quickly arranged as cover. They'll test the outer door first, but they won't get through. It's when they start looking for other ways in that we need to worry. As if on cue, a different sound echoed through the shelter, something moving across the roof. Voss glanced up. They're checking the thermal vents. Smart bastards. The vents are secured, right? Aldra asked, aiming her weapon toward the ceiling. Triple reinforced after their last visit. But they keep evolving new approaches. Voss's respect for the creatures was evident in his tone. Watch the heating conduits along the north wall. That's their most likely. A section of the icy floor near the mentioned wall suddenly bulged upward, ice cracking as something powerful pushed from beneath. Voss swore and fired a warning shot that punched into the ice near the disturbance. The bulging stopped momentarily, then resumed with greater force. They're coming through the maintenance tunnels, Voss said grimly. Must have found the exterior access point. The ice cracked further, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across the floor. A scaled snout pushed through, steam rising where warm air met cold reptilian flesh. The creature made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a hiss, that raised the hairs on Aldra's neck. More ice broke away, and Aldra got her first clear look at an ice dragon. The creature was approximately the size of an earth tiger, with a long, sinuous body covered in overlapping scales that shifted color from slate blue to almost translucent as it moved. Its head was triangular, with multiple eyes positioned for maximum peripheral vision and a jaw that appeared to be double-hinged. Most disturbing were the appendages, not quite legs, not quite tentacles, that ended in wicked-looking claws or hooks, depending on how the creature flexed them. The ice dragon pulled itself fully into the chamber, its head swiveling as it assessed the two humans. More scraping sounds indicated others were following. Now would be good, Lieutenant, Voss said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Aldra squeezed the trigger. Understanding. The pulse blast caught the ice dragon's center mass, sending it stumbling backward with a shriek that sounded almost hurt. Not just physically, but emotionally wounded. The creature's scales flickered through a rapid spectrum of colors, deep purples and blues that somehow conveyed distress. Wait, Aldra said suddenly, lowering her weapon. Something about the creature's reaction troubled her. Voss, look at it. The ice dragon had retreated to the edge of the hole, but it wasn't preparing for another attack. Instead, it was making a series of low, musical sounds, complex harmonics that definitely weren't random animal noises. It's trying to communicate, Aldra realized. Voss kept his rifle trained on the creature. Lieutenant, I appreciate your diplomatic instincts, but these things have tried to kill me twice. Have they? Aldra asked, studying the dragon's posture. Or have they been trying to get inside for warmth, just like I was? More ice dragons emerged from the tunnel, 3 in total. But instead of attacking, they arranged themselves in what appeared to be a defensive formation around the injured one. The wounded dragon continued its musical vocalizations, and the others responded with harmonies of their own. That's not hunting behavior, Aldra said softly. That's a family. She slowly set her weapon down and took a step forward. The dragon's multiple eyes tracked her movement, but they didn't retreat or advance. Their scales continued to shift colors in what she was beginning to recognize as a form of communication. "Lieutenant, what are you doing?" Voss asked, though his own weapon had lowered slightly. "My job," Aldra replied. "First contact protocols. These aren't just animals, Voss. Look at their behavior patterns, their vocalizations, their social structure. They're people." She knelt down, making herself smaller and less threatening. The injured dragon tilted its triangular head, regarding her with what seemed like curiosity rather than hostility. "I'm sorry," Aldra said aloud, though she knew the creature couldn't understand her words. But tone was universal. "I'm sorry we hurt you." The dragon's response was immediate, a soft, melodic sound that somehow conveyed acknowledgement and forgiveness. Voss lowered his rifle completely. 15 years, he said wonderingly. 15 years I've been here, and I saw them as predators. They probably saw you the same way, Aldra said gently. Two different species, both trying to survive in a hostile environment, both afraid of each other. She reached into her emergency kit and pulled out a medical scanner. "May I?" she asked the dragon, holding up the device. The creature extended its injured foreleg, definitely a gesture of trust. The scanner revealed fascinating biology. The ice dragons weren't just adapted to the cold, they were living thermal regulators, able to adjust their body chemistry to generate heat when needed. Their complex scale patterns weren't just camouflage, they were a sophisticated visual language. "Incredible," Aldra breathed. "Their entire physiology is designed for cooperation and communication. They're not solitary predators at all, they're a collective intelligence." As if responding to her understanding, all four dragons began vocalizing together, creating a harmony that filled the chamber with hauntingly beautiful music. Their scales rippled with warm colors, golds and soft blues that seemed to express joy. Voss sat down heavily in his chair. "I've been living next to the first sentient species discovered in this sector, and I spent 15 years trying to keep them out in the cold." "You didn't know," Aldra said, still kneeling near the dragons. "But now we do. And that changes everything." The injured dragon had recovered enough to move closer. It extended one of its flexible appendages toward Aldra, not threateningly, but gently. When she didn't flinch, it touched her hand with what felt unmistakably like gratitude. "They're not trying to break in," Aldra realized. "They're trying to make contact. They've been trying to communicate with you for years, haven't they?" she asked Voss. He nodded slowly. "The attempts to get inside, they always happened during the worst storms. And they never actually damaged anything vital. If they'd really wanted to hurt me, they could have," Aldra finished. "But they didn't. They were just knocking on the door." The dragon seemed to sense the shift in understanding. The largest one, clearly the elder of the group, approached Voss directly. When it spoke, its vocalizations were different, more formal, more deliberate. "I think," Aldra said quietly, "it's trying to apologize too. For frightening you all these years." Voss looked at the creature, really looked at it, perhaps for the first time. "Well," he said finally, his gruff voice softer than usual. "I suppose we've all been fools." The elder dragon's scales shifted to warm amber patterns, and it made a sound that was unmistakably laughter. "The storm's getting worse," Voss observed, checking his instruments. "They can't go back out in this." "Then they don't," Aldra said simply. "There's room here for everyone." And for the first time in 15 years, Friedrich Voss's frozen refuge became truly warm. Mercy and redemption. 3 days later, the storm had passed, but the ice dragons remained. They had settled into the refuge as if they belonged there, which, Aldra reflected, they did. The injured one, whom she'd started thinking of as Harmony due to its musical vocalizations, had recovered completely under her care. The elder, Voss had dubbed Wisdom for its patient, thoughtful demeanor, had begun what could only be described as formal diplomatic exchanges. The dragons, it turned out, had their own complex society beneath the ice. They were the descendants of an ancient civilization that had adapted to the moon's changing climate over millennia. They had technology, not mechanical like human tech, but biological and chemical. They could reshape ice like humans shaped metal, create warmth from their own bodies, and most remarkably, they had maintained oral history stretching back thousands of years. They remember when this moon was green, Aldra explained to Voss as they watched the dragons arrange themselves around the fire pit in what appeared to be a council formation. They've been waiting for someone to talk to for longer than our species has had spaceflight. Voss shook his head in wonder. All those years, and I thought I was the only intelligent life on this rock. Turns out I was the least intelligent life on this rock. The rescue beacon's proximity alert suddenly activated. Through the exterior cameras, they could see landing lights descending through the clear post-storm sky. Galactic Navy, Aldra identified, reading the ship's configuration. Search and rescue. But as the ship touched down, Aldra's expression darkened. She recognized the hull markings. That's not search and rescue, she said grimly. That's the GSV Retribution. Captain Blackwood's ship. Voss checked his weapons. The ones who attacked your transport. The very same. She must have tracked the beacon. Aldra's mind raced. She can't know about the dragons. If the Navy discovers a new sentient species, they'll want to study them, Voss finished. Catalog them. Control them. Through the cameras, they watched armed figures disembarking from the ship. Captain Blackwood herself led the group, her movements sharp and purposeful. Wisdom approached Aldra, its scales flickering in patterns she was beginning to understand meant urgency and concern. The dragon had sensed the tension. Can you and your people hide? Aldra asked. Go back to your tunnels until this is over. But Wisdom's response was clear, they would not abandon their new friends. Then we make a stand, Voss said simply. Lieutenant, they're coming for you, aren't they? What did you learn on Helios 7 that they don't want reported? Aldra nodded. Evidence of illegal weapons sales. Blackwood's using her Navy position to run arms to the outer colonies. I documented everything before the attack. Good. Then we have leverage. The dragons had formed a protective circle around the humans, their scales shifting to camouflage patterns that made them nearly invisible against the ice walls. But they weren't hiding, they were positioning for defense. The outer door's emergency override activated. Captain Blackwood entered with 4 armed soldiers, her pristine uniform a stark contrast to the comfortable chaos of the refuge. Lieutenant Metonin, she said coldly. You've led us quite a chase. Captain Blackwood, Aldra replied, rising slowly. I'm surprised to see you. I thought you were too busy with your unauthorized business ventures to conduct rescue operations. Blackwood's expression didn't change. I'm here to collect a wayward officer and ensure certain sensitive information doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Whose hands would those be? Voss asked mildly. The Galactic Council. The Anti-Corruption Commission. Blackwood noticed him for the first time. And you are? Friedrich Voss. Former Colonel, Special Operations Command. Retired. He emphasized the rank deliberately. For the first time, Blackwood showed uncertainty. Special Operations outranked Navy in most jurisdictions, and even retired Spec Ops carried weight. Colonel, she said carefully. This is a Navy matter. The lieutenant has classified information that. That proves you're a criminal, Aldra interrupted. I have documentation of your weapons sales, Captain. All of it. Blackwood's hand moved to her sidearm. Where is it? Uploaded to multiple secure servers. Dead man switches. Anything happens to me, and the whole galaxy knows what you've been doing. It was a bluff, but Blackwood couldn't be sure. Her soldiers shifted nervously, sensing the tension. That's when Wisdom acted. The dragon shimmered into visibility directly behind one of the soldiers, moving with impossible grace and silence. Its scales rippled with colors that somehow conveyed authority and power. When it spoke, its harmonic voice filled the chamber with resonant tones that seemed to vibrate in human bones. The soldiers spun, weapons raised, but Voss's voice cracked like a whip, "Stand down." The authority in his voice was unmistakable, the command presence of a career military officer. The soldiers hesitated, caught between orders and instinct. "Captain," Voss said conversationally, "I'd like you to meet Wisdom, elder of the Ice Dragon clan. Along with Harmony, Swift, and Guardian." As he spoke, the other dragons materialized around the chamber, their positions chosen to demonstrate that the humans were surrounded but protected. "What?" Blackwood began. "The first sentient species discovered in this sector in over 50 years, Aldra said. A diplomatic first contact of unprecedented importance. The kind of discovery that makes careers, or destroys them if mishandled." Wisdom approached Blackwood directly, its scales shifting to patterns that somehow conveyed both dignity and barely restrained power. When it spoke, the harmonic tones were clearly a formal greeting, or perhaps a warning. "They're offering you mercy, Captain," Aldra translated, though she wasn't entirely sure how she understood. "But they're also making it clear that they protect their friends." Blackwood looked around the chamber at the dragons, at Voss's steady gaze, at her soldiers' uncertain faces. The calculation was written on her features, a criminal investigation she might survive, but interfering with first contact with a new sentient species would end her career and her freedom. "Stand down," she ordered her soldiers quietly. "Wise choice," Voss said. "Now, I believe you have a rescue to complete, Captain. Lieutenant Metonin needs transport back to the core world so she can file her report, all of her reports." As Blackwood and her soldiers filed out, Wisdom approached Aldra one final time. The dragon's scales shifted to warm, golden patterns, and its harmonic voice carried unmistakable gratitude and farewell. "They're thanking us," Aldra realized. "For seeing them as people, not monsters. And they're promising to remember," Voss added. "Both the mercy we showed them, and the mercy they showed us." Later, as Aldra prepared to leave with the rescue ship, she found Voss standing at the exterior window, watching the dragons disappear into their tunnel networks. "You could come back with me," she offered. "Your exile, if you testified about Blackwood's operation, the Navy would probably reinstate you." Voss smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "I've got responsibilities here now. Someone needs to serve as ambassador to our new neighbors. Besides," he looked around the refuge, "this place isn't a prison anymore. It's home." As the rescue ship lifted off, Aldra watched the ice moon shrink below them. Somewhere in those frozen wastes, ancient beings were singing in harmonies that spoke of hope, understanding, and the mercy that connects all thinking creatures. In her report to the Galactic Council, she would write about first contact protocols and diplomatic procedures. But she would remember the moment when fear became understanding, when enemies became friends, and when a gruff old soldier learned that sometimes the most dangerous creatures in the universe are the ones who understand mercy. 6 months later, Aldra received a priority transmission from the Ice Moon. The video showed Voss, looking healthier and more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, standing beside Wisdom in what appeared to be a much larger version of the frozen refuge. Behind them, human and dragon engineers worked together on some kind of construction project. "Lieutenant," Voss's voice crackled through the comm, "thought you'd like to know, the dragons have agreed to share their thermal regulation technology with the Galactic Engineering Corps. We're building the first truly sustainable colony on an ice world. And..." He paused, his expression almost shy. "The Council has officially recognized the ice dragons as a sovereign species. Wisdom here is their first ambassador to the galaxy." The dragon beside him shifted its scales to patterns Aldra now recognized as joy and pride. When it spoke, its harmonic voice was picked up by translation software that had been calibrated to their language. "Tell Aldra friend that the ice sings of her courage," the translator rendered. "She who saw people where others saw monsters. She who chose understanding over fear." Aldra smiled, remembering the bitter cold of that first day, the fear in her heart when she'd faced the unknown. Now that same ice moon was becoming a beacon of cooperation between species, a testament to what could be achieved when beings chose to see each other as allies rather than threats. "Send them my regards," she told her communications officer. "And tell them the stars themselves sing of their mercy." As the transmission ended, Aldra turned back to her current assignment, another diplomatic mission, another chance to build bridges between worlds. But now she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, and that the greatest strength lies not in the weapons we carry, but in the mercy we choose to show. In the cold depths of space, on an ice moon at the edge of known space, dragons and humans worked together under alien stars, proving that intelligence and compassion could triumph over fear and misunderstanding. They had found warmth not just in shared shelters, but in shared understanding. And in the end, that made all the difference. The end.